All right, I think we're live. Hello, friends. Let's see that people can hear me before we get too into it. Yeah, it's Friday. It's time for another SerenityOS office hours. And yes, people can hear me. Perfect. Okay. Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to SerenityOS office hours, the weekly live stream where we take random questions about SerenityOS, technical and non-technical. All questions are welcome. We have an FAQ. The link is in the pinned comment and also in the bottom left of the screen, where you can find answers to the most commonly asked questions. And outside of that, I just want to say welcome to everybody. I hope folks are having a nice week, and I certainly had a unusual week. There's been a lot of publicity going on in the system, around the system lately. So I was on the Ubuntu podcast yesterday, and today Linus is the guest on the CPP cast. So if you haven't checked that out, be sure to go to cppcast.com and check out Linus's interview, where he talks about his experience learning C++ from scratch. So he knew nothing about C++ basically when he started working on Serenity. So you can listen to a very nice interview with him on that show. Okay, let's see. So got a bunch of hellos in the chat. Mustafa says that somehow he attends these live streams more regularly than any lectures at his university at this time in the morning. Well, I am glad to provide provide that service, but I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that everybody enjoys the office hours. Let's see, and Lucas says that he just wants to say that everything around here is kind of great. Great project, great people. I hope you're all doing awesome. And obviously, I would just echo that sentiment. I also think everything around here is kind of great. Love the people, love the project. So thank you all for being here. So as you know, the format here is that you ask the questions or bring up the subjects, and then we just dig into stuff. So we'll start here with Stefan B asking about how to remove installed ports. So there isn't really a clean way right now. We don't have any tracking of what files get installed by a port. So really the only way to be 100% sure that your port has been completely uninstalled is to rebuild the disk image. And you can do that by just doing rm your disk image. So if I wanted to do that here, I would do rm disk image in my build directory, and then just rebuild it again. So Ninja setup and run. And oh, wait. This is not actually true what I'm saying. You have to, it's not enough to rebuild the disk image. You also have to nuke the root directory. So ports get installed into root, usually under root user local. I don't have any ports installed at the moment, so let's just install one just for the heck of it. So we'll get Vim, for example, and oh, I guess it has to build some dependencies first. But basically what you have to do is you have to nuke the entire root directory to be completely sure, and then rebuild the system. So that's a little bit unfortunate. It's not something that we have invested any time in, because usually disk images are pretty short-lived anyway among the developers. But as we go forward, it does become more of a concern to have a way to undo port installations. And then Mustafa was also asking here a long time ago about the latency being a bit high. So let me see what kind of latency I'm on. I'm on ultra low latency, according to YouTube, which is the lowest setting I can offer. I am on wired Ethernet, and should be good upload, but outside of that, I can't really control the latency. So it is what it is. So Paya says, I want to thank for great videos. Is there any particular features from other independent operating systems like Haiku or Redux that you would like to have in Serenity? So I'm not super familiar with the feature set of those operating systems or many other independent operating systems, but I certainly like the spirit of the Haiku project a lot. I think we're very similar to each other in terms of like looking into the past for something that we perceive to be great and then wanting to bring that greatness into the present and continue to elaborate on it and iterate on it. But there isn't really like a feature of any specific operating system that I think, oh, I really want that one. Because I guess I think we have kind of a nice feature set already. Of course, there are some things that are nice. When it comes to performance problems that we have in our system design at the moment, we currently have a rather expensive fork, and there are a bunch of different ways to design around having expensive fork, and different systems solve that in different ways, so that's something to explore. Stefan says, Haiku OS has icon built into the executables. Yes, we have that too. Our executables have icons in them as well. Let me see if we can run the system and I'll show you. So if we just go to /bin in the file manager, you see that these are just random elf executables, but they have icons embedded in them. And we embed them as, we embed the icon files into the executable, and then our file manager knows how to extract it, or our GUI library knows how to extract the icon from a file. And then Ali says, why create T renamed to make ref counted T? Well, let me tell you about that. So yesterday I did a change where I renamed create T to make ref counted T because somebody put a create T in the global namespace. So you could create a reference counted object or an instance of a reference counted class by doing foo, create foo like this. And that to me is just, it's too generic of a name to put globally like this. And it doesn't actually tell you very much about what it is creating. To contrast, the new name, make ref counted, is a pretty close match to what we already have for making a non-reference counted object, which is make. This is something that we've had for years. This is how you instantiate a new object, heap allocated object, and wrap it in a smart pointer. And this is just sort of a complement to that instantiates a reference counted object, wrapping it in a reference counting smart pointer. So the new name gives us symmetry with make and is more specific. That's why I made the change. Mustafa says, code review video for PR 9776. Well, since nobody has been asking any other questions, why don't we do a code review office hours about 9776. Let's see, what is that? 9776, can I search for that like that? No. How do you get to a thing? Okay. Rename act to yak. Code review video for this. Well, I just closed that because, I mean, it's obviously not a serious PR. I thought that you wanted me to review something serious. Let's see. Ali says, I will be whining about this for a while. Sure. It's good that you have something to whine on. It was getting old, the things that you were whining about already. So consider this a new and refreshing whine topic. Graham says, I see Serenity more as taking the operating system from a place that they were most functional and combining that with new and modern practices that actually work. Yeah, I suppose you could think of it that way. That we're kind of taking operating system concepts and UI designs from a time where they were partly due to necessity and because they were, it was the state of the art at one time, and we're trying to salvage what was great about that and bring them into the modern time where we have much better tools, much better languages, and just much better ability to take these concepts and refine them. So I guess I do kind of agree with that. I especially like this idea of applying modern practices to well-established ideas. It reminds me a lot of these wave musical genres, like synthwave and vaporwave and whatnot, where you make this music that's kind of inspired by 1980s and 1990s music, but using modern synthesizers and audio workstation tools. Let's see. Mustafa says, if you actually don't mind doing a code review and there's time, he would appreciate thoughts on 9742. Well, let's do that then. 9742. Okay, so this is a draft. Let's have a look. Add a widget to select a color from anywhere on the screen. Okay, so this is a new widget that allows you to pick a color. You're calling it global color select. All right. First thing is we're adding an eyedropper cursor. I'm sure that it's fine, but let's have a look at it anyway. Oh, wow, that's a chunky squeezy boy there, but it's probably okay. I like that it's pointed up like that, much like the arrow cursor. That kind of makes sense spatially, but at the same time, something tells me that it should be angled down. I don't know why. Maybe that's habit from some existing program. Yeah, so just cursors. But where do we do the actually interesting stuff? So how do you select select the color from anywhere on the screen? Let's see. So this widget, a new global color select widget that allows you to pick a color from anywhere on the screen. To use it, you just need to construct it, give it a callback function, and then ask it to start selecting. Okay, so the way you use this selector is you make the global color select. That name, I'm not crazy about that name, by the way. And then you put a onColor change callback on it, sure. And then you call begin selecting. Yeah, so this API is really awkward, and we can definitely do better, but let's not obsess about that at this stage. So let's see how you have actually made the thing. So it's a, what is it? It's a widget that, when constructed, constructs a window. Okay, so you make a transparent window with alpha. And then when you mouse move, wait, how on earth does this work? When you mouse move, then you get the screen bitmap under the cursor and then yank out the color value from there. Right, so you are taking a continuous stream of screenshots in order to get the color under the mouse cursor. So I think that this would probably be much better implemented by coordinating with Windows Server, so that you can tell Windows Server to just give you the color under the mouse cursor, or yeah, under the mouse cursor, and then you don't have to actually create bitmaps and send bitmaps across the IPC boundary, because with this design you have here, you are creating a continuous stream of bitmap objects that require VM allocation and opening a shareable file descriptor and passing that across IPC and everything, where you can instead have a simple IPC API that just says, tell me the color under the cursor. I think that would probably be a lot smoother. And then as for the API, I think ideally this would be an API that you don't need to instantiate any object, but rather you just call a function, and then it doesn't return until you have actually clicked somewhere, thereby selecting a color. So you can have a function that you call it that creates any object necessary for you, and then maybe makes a nested event loop and then only returns to you once it's finished. That is my intuition about that. And then you wouldn't need these callbacks, but rather you could just have that function return an optional color. I hope that makes sense. That is kind of my initial reaction to this PR. But if I had more time, I would write all these things down, but now I've said them out loud, so you know what I mean, and we can of course talk about it further on Discord or whatever, but yeah. So let's continue with some next thing here. Itzaka says, just dropping to say that this is awesome and love your videos, very relaxing. Well, I'm glad that it is relaxing for you. These streams are not particularly relaxing for me. My heart rate goes up and I get kind of excited, but it is fun, so it's all good. But I'm glad that it is relaxing for others. So Payas here says, how portable would you say Serenity is right now? Would be nice to see it as a prime candidate for RISC-V or small single board computers or small board computers, SBCs. I would say the kernel is the least portable in the system, which, you know, it's typically the case for any operating system. There are a bunch of x86 isms, less so than originally because we have ported the system to 64-bit architecture, but it is an x86 64 architecture, so still plenty of x86 isms. There is currently some work towards AArch64 support. I don't know how serious that is, but somebody who's been working on that would probably be a better person to comment on the portability of the system. Let's see. Mati says, do you plan to create... So based on the start of your question, I can say that I don't have a plan. And then the rest of the question, the answer is the same. Let's see. Dither8 says, any thoughts on mod music from trackers? A lot of very early internet style synthwave there. So I used to use Fast Tracker or Fast Tracker 2 when I was a kid. So I'm quite fond of mod music. And I always liked the way that you compose music with trackers, that you just like stringing together samples and triggering them. It is very neat. But I don't have any particular thoughts on mod music outside of that. Mati says, do you check licenses of images inside pull requests? So anybody who submits any code to SerenityOS is asked to submit only to class BSD compatible things. So I don't know what that means if I check a license of an image inside PR. I don't go and like look up the image and try to find the license for it. Not sure how I would do that. But it's treated the same as code, really. Like I guess the two class BSD is implied. Let's see. Jean-Baptiste says, do you think SerenityOS will stay a traditional Unix-like implementation, or do you think it will deviate towards Posix compatible and do its own bespoke things under the Posix hood? I think it will deviate, absolutely, because it's just obvious that there are ways that you can do things smarter under the hood, while still maintaining a Posix compatible exterior. And I think it's silly to reject something better just because we want to conform to some sort of identity that we've tied ourselves to as like, oh, this has to be a Unix-like, so we can't do this clearly smarter thing. I don't subscribe to that way of thinking. But I also do not subscribe to the very common way of thinking that you have to do things differently just because, or just in order to be different from Posix, right? I know there's a lot of people who feel that Posix is automatically inherently bad, and you have to do things differently from Posix to be good. I don't subscribe to that at all. But yeah, I think we will deviate. For example, like this thing I mentioned about fork, like there's a lot of ways to implement process spawning much more efficiently than fork allows you. And you can still support fork as an API on top of such mechanisms. So that is an interesting area. Username goes here, it says, how do applications draw stuff on their window? Like, where do they write the pixels data? I imagine there is no draw pixel syscall, right? Right. This is quite abstract in the system, or abstracted. So we are very far from having a draw pixel syscall. Of course, there was one originally when I was playing around, but the way that applications draw stuff on their window, I do have videos about that. I also did a live stream specifically about that, and I recommend that you check that out. So if you go to my YouTube channel and then go under playlists and then live streams, you can see this is the stream that we're having right now. But at the bottom of the older streams, you can find live tour, widgets and painting in SerenityOS, in which I talk in depth about how pixels get drawn onto the screen. The short answer is that we have a hardware frame buffer, and then we have a Windows Server program that composites window bitmaps according to the window stack into that frame buffer. And then we have client programs sending their bitmaps over to the Windows Server for compositing. So Mehdi says, can you talk about Serenity's Init system? Sure. The Init system in Serenity is not like, it's not like classic Unix Init. It's a bit more like macOS LaunchD, or a little bit like systemd, but not really. And the whole thing is driven by this program called System Server, which is configured via etc system server ini. So this file right here, let's switch to a darker theme maybe. This file right here has all of the services that are started by the system server, and some of them are started immediately on boot. Others are started lazily when needed. So we have here, for example, you can see that, oh, let's look at this one. Web content is lazy, and it means that we don't actually start the web content service until you open a browser or until you try to use web content. And most of the services, or actually, I don't know if most, but many of them are lazy. There is no dependency graph resolution or anything like that. We just kind of start the non-lazy ones at boot, and then the lazy ones get started when you need them. This is an area where we could definitely improve and become more sophisticated. But what we have right now works reasonably well. And I think one of my favorite mechanisms in the system server is the socket takeover mechanism. And if you look in the help system, you can find a document about system server and how it works. And the socket takeover mechanism allows system server to create an IPC socket somewhere in the file system for a service. So for example, the ifam5 here asks about why web content is there. So the way it works, when you start browser, then what you're starting is just a UI program called browser, which then connects to a IPC socket in temp portal. So this is where we have all of our IPC portals. And one of them is web content. And if we look in the etc system server ini file, we can see that the web, where is that web content? Here. Web content service manages this socket, and it is lazy. And the socket takeover mechanism means that system server creates this socket, listens on it, but waits until somebody actually connects to it before launching a web content process. And it also says here multi-instance. This means that every time that somebody connects to the socket, we spawn a new web content process, and that's how we are able to have one web content process per browser tab. So if I open another browser tab here, I now have two web content processes, both started in this way. So that's a little bit about that. I recommend checking out the help pages or the man pages if you prefer. Help and man both expose the same info. So system server, you can read about the file format in the man pages here. Let's see. So Ashwin says, Mr. Andreas, will SerenityOS remain open source after you've been acquired by a company, for example? SerenityOS will always be open source and free. I am definitely not closing the source, and we use a permissive license. So that does mean that if somebody wanted to, they could take Serenity, make modifications to it that they don't show you, and then try to sell it to you. But that's not something that I'm interested in doing. I'm just here to build something nice for myself. And what happens outside of that is up to other people. Let's see, the ifam says, oh, so they are isolated too? Right, so web tabs, every browser tab runs in an isolated process, so that if you have a crash, for example, somewhere on the web, it does not bring down the entire browser or other tabs in the browser. It is really the only reasonable way to build a browser is to, at the very least, separate tabs from each other, right? Because certainly with an immature browser like ours, it crashes a lot. And if it would bring down the whole browser all the time, that would be really obnoxious. So we isolate them. But it also, of course, not just stability, but it also has security benefits. The fact that if you are able to exploit some bug, it means that you are still not, you're still only inside the web content process. You're not, just because you exploit the JavaScript engine, for example, doesn't give you access to the whole system. You're still stuck in a heavily sandboxed web content process. Ditherate says, any concerns you will be asked to plant backdoors in Serenity by the CIA? If they want to plant backdoors in Serenity, they can just do it themselves. It's not really something that I'm concerned about. But the continuous refactoring culture of Serenity ensures that any backdoors placed in Serenity by the CIA would be broken within 2 or 3 weeks anyway, because we keep changing our APIs. So that is our the way that we protect ourselves against backdoors, is that we keep changing everything, breaking their backdoors and making it into an unreasonable maintenance burden for the 3-letter agencies. Andre says, is there a concept of threads in Serenity? Yes, absolutely. We have, every process has any number of threads. Most processes in the system are single-threaded because we haven't really made a lot of use of threads in our programs, but some things like thumbnail generation. So if I open a directory here with a lot of icons in it, the thumbnails for these icons are generated on a separate thread so that it doesn't block the UI while you are scrolling around, stuff like that. And if you open up System Monitor, you can see that we have 27 processes, but 28 threads. So that gives you an idea of just how much we are taking advantage of multi-threading at the moment. But as we venture into a world of more mature multi-core support, making more use of threads becomes a lot more interesting because at the moment we are still by default running in single core mode. So even if you spawn multiple threads, they still have to take turns on the CPU. But booting in multi-core mode, of course, allows more threads to parallelize. And that is clearly the future, but it's just not stable enough yet that we have been digging into taking advantage of it. But it works very similarly to Linux in that you can create a new thread, and the thread has its own PID, but it's also part of a process that has sort of, I think we follow the same convention as Linux, in that every thread has a PID, but there's sort of a separation between thread ID and process ID. But because the Posix API is weirdly unaware of threads, then you have to kind of jump through these weird hoops when you're determining whether you are the main thread of a program or a secondary thread. And that's, by the way, that's an area where I feel like it's not unreasonable to do something better than Posix, just to achieve better clarity in our API surface, even though it would be like non-Posix compliant or whatever. We can still support the Posix APIs. Let's see, Mitchell says, first time here. Question, do you plan on being able to develop Serenity on Serenity? Sure. Absolutely, but my thinking about this is always that I don't want to switch until it is more convenient for me to use Serenity than to use Linux. And the issue is that today it is simply more convenient for me to use Linux because I have video recording and coding. I can upload YouTube videos and stream from here and stuff like that. Once the experience for me is more smooth on Serenity, I will just switch. But I'm not in a hurry, so I don't mind that it takes time. I know other people are in much more of a hurry than I am, but for me, I'm very pragmatic, so I'm just going to wait until it's good enough, or it's actually better than Linux for me. Mustafa says, security by instability. That's exactly what it is. It's security by instability. Good luck backdooring us. Your backdoor will break very soon. Mehdi says, is GML specific to SerenityOS? Yes. GML, or the GUI markup language, which we use to describe graphical interfaces in Serenity, is invented for Serenity. So let's look at something like this is the language, right? So this is the cursor theme tab from the mouse settings application. And if you're familiar with Serenity GUI programming, you recognize all these things. These are just things that you would type out in C++. And it's a little bit tedious to write out all this code programmatically, or to write out all the code manually. So we give you GML as a way to express these widget trees in more of a structured tree-like format. And it has been, we've been through a bunch of different iterations on how to make GUI programming nicer for Serenity. And my thinking originally was always that, we need to have a Visual Basic design tool, because I loved using Visual Basic as a kid. And then I tried building that. I tried twice, and both times it just didn't actually take off, because ultimately the way I want to write UI is expressing it in text. And it seems like that's what other people prefer as well. That's not to say that we couldn't build a sort of a graphical UI that is on top of GML and that allows you to design these things graphically. That might be really cool, but it's not something that we have looked into yet. Let's see. Graham says, is there any form of window tiling in Serenity? And if so, does it have key bindings for productivity? There's a lot of implications here. The implication that it is more productive, which I'm not sure about, but you can certainly tile left and right with super left and super right. You can also maximize and unmaximize and things like that. So super and arrow keys, or Windows key plus arrow keys, I recommend playing around with that. You can also drag to edges if you want to automatically set these sizes. So that might be something that you're looking for. We don't have automatic tiling based on some predefined thing, but I'm not a big user of tiling type interfaces. So I'm a simple window cascade, window stack user, enjoyer, and yeah. But I know that that's something that some people feel strongly about, but nobody has felt strongly enough to make a version of it that actually fits into this model. So that's why it doesn't really exist beyond these features. Paya says, currently Serenity can be considered declarative because user literally builds everything, but any thoughts on making Serenity system ports config declarative in far off future a la NixGuix? Okay, so there, I don't have any plans or thoughts about the future. I don't work like that. Like, I don't know what happens in the future, so no plans, no thoughts. Let's see. Landkeeper says, does Serenity have a namespace like Linux? Do you mean like file system namespaces, process namespaces, that sort of thing? We do not have that. Everything exists in a global namespace, so there's no namespaces or container-like features in Serenity. But we do have, what we do have is pretty aggressive sandboxing, which most programs opt into, but it is voluntary. So by default, you do see everything globally, and it is kind of like a traditional Unix in that way. David says, could you show where and how system server starts? Yes, absolutely. If we open up init in the kernel, so init.cpp in the kernel root directory, and then we just search for system server because I don't remember exactly where it is. Let's see, so it would be right here in init stage 2, which is init in C++ is divided into 2 stages. So it's the first stage, and then we start the scheduler so that we become multi-threaded, and then init stage 2 is the first thread that we spawn. So this is with multiprocessing or multi-threading enabled. And then the last thing that we do in init stage 2 is, or should be, starting the user space init program. So here, we ask the kernel command line for the user space init program, which by default will be a system server. So as you can see here, we look up the init parameter to the on the kernel command line, and if there is no override set, then we use bin system server, and then what we do is we create the first user process with this path here. So and then we say like, oh, this will be user ID 0, group ID 0, parent processes 0, everything, blah, blah, blah. And this is where it starts. So in init CPP, just look for user space init, and you can find that. And let's see. Ashwin says, have you looked at Swift UI for inspiration for GML? No, not really. I didn't really look at anything for inspiration. It sort of grew organically, but I have been around Qt for a long time. So of course I'm familiar with QML. So I guess that would be the closest inspiration. Paxi Lexi Fixie says someone should add a GML syntax highlighting plugin for CLion. So usually when somebody says someone should, then that's something that we frown upon a little bit, because you should do that, not somebody. You should, if you want that. Let's see. Klotz1 says, "Hi Andreas, when developing an operating system, how leaky is the hardware abstraction that modern hypervisors provide?" Oh, I don't exactly know how to interpret that question. Can you rephrase that in a way that I can understand? I don't know what you mean by the hardware abstraction of the hypervisor being leaky. One thing that I could say is that modern emulators actually allow the emulated environment to know that they're emulated, of course, and they make available optimized hardware, or optimized fake hardware, like a fake graphics card that has a much more efficient user, or efficient API than an emulated device would have. Because, you know, if you're talking to a VGA controller to do graphics, then you have to deal with a lot of like 1980s idiosyncrasies of the VGA controller. Whereas if you know that you're speaking to QEMU, for example, you can bypass a lot of weird ancient rituals and just go straight to, well, I just want you to put these pixels here, right? Or just set this resolution or whatever. So that's something that we're making more and more use of in Serenity, learning how to interact with these like virtualization specific devices. Let's see. The IFAM says, what Serenity uses from the Unix sources? Apps, libs, and why does not make sense to make everything from scratch by yourself? We do not reuse anything from the Unix sources. I don't know what you mean by Unix sources, but we don't use third-party code in Serenity. Everything is made from scratch because it does make sense. The Redco says, "Hi Andreas, love your project and the community you built around it. Is ACK as fast at the C++ as the C++ standard libraries shipping with GCC, Clang, and MSVC when it comes to critical algorithms like sorting or hash maps?" So I don't know that anybody has actually done the legwork of comparing these things, but I have myself done the legwork of comparing compile times more than once, and ACK is definitely significantly faster to compile. And I don't know that we use sufficiently unfavorable algorithms anywhere that would create a problem. It's certainly possible that the STL that ships with GCC, for example, that they have more mature implementations of, you know, some hash map or something like that. It's not something that I've measured, but if that turns out to be the case, then we can easily improve our hash map. We tend to drive optimization work based on profiling data and like empirical observations that something is slow, rather than like, oh, we need to do this because STL does this, right? And I know that confuses some people. Some people come to the project and they think, oh, well, you don't have this thing that the STL has. We have to fix this by adding this thing that the STL has. And that's not necessarily a good use of anyone's time, because we're not trying to be the STL or trying to replace the STL. We're just carving out our own path based on the things that we need for this project. So, but to your question, like, most likely it's not as fast in some cases, and in other cases it's probably as fast or faster. Somebody could do a deep investigation and figure that out, but it's not really something that interests me personally. Alex says, does GML get parsed during the program runtime, or do you use it to offline generate C++ that builds the UI? At the moment, it gets parsed at runtime, but it would be pretty easy to do it at compile time as well. we had an earlier iteration of a similar concept that did compile time generation, but now we actually do it at runtime. And the fact that we do it at runtime, the main reason I did it that way was to make it easy to build the playground application where you can prototype GML, which of course is a very, very nice feature. So here we can simply throw this text into the GML parser and it just spits out the UI right away. And if it turns out to be a performance concern that we are doing this at runtime, then of course we can write a compile time generator, because as I was saying earlier, like this description here really maps very naturally to C++. It just hasn't turned out to be a significant bottleneck in any test that anybody has cared enough about to do something about. I hope that makes sense. Let's see, Bernard says, what is your opinion on package managers? Do you prefer the Windows way of installing packages, or would you prefer a centralized package repository for SerenityOS? Well, I think there's good things and bad things about both approaches to package management. I certainly appreciate the freedoms that you get from the Windows approach, and the culture around Windows packages where everybody knows that they're out there on their own. So if they want their package to run on your machine, they got to bundle all the dependencies and everything. Whereas on Linux, it's like a bit blurry. Sometimes you don't need to care about dependencies, and in other cases you have to care about them. And I don't know. I think there's virtues to both approaches. I do like having dynamic libraries, for example, because I appreciate the security benefits of dynamic libraries, and I think that it's elegant, but at the same time it is also a performance problem. Like, we're actually seeing a performance problem since the introduction of dynamic libraries, because application startup is quite a bit slower now that we have to link everything at startup, link everything and do relocations and stuff like that. So I don't know what is really the best solution to these things. But as far as package management goes, I think for our system here, it feels like a combination of the both would be the coolest. So if we would have some kind of nice UI, because in Serenity these things are often driven by the desire to have a nice UI for something. And I really like the way that you install and configure system components in Windows 2000 and Windows XP, with this add/remove programs. If you can go in an interface like that and like check and uncheck stuff to get your stuff, and then if you could allow like third-party software to hook into that mechanism, I think you could have something pretty sweet. But it's not something that I've actively been thinking about. And I know that it's something that comes up often. There's a part in the FAQ about package management as well. But, it's such an open topic that we could talk about it forever. So let's move on. Let's see. The IFAM says, how complex is to provide hardware abstraction layers for every motherboard, architecture, components, etc.? Could you tell what was your approach to make everything working together and where you started? Well, so the way that I've approached this is to simply target the default machine that QEMU emulates, which is kind of a basic IBM style PC with a BIOS. And we simply do not support machines that deviate too far from that unless somebody has actually gone through the process of trying to boot on one of those machines, discovering what the problems were, and working their way through them and fixing drivers and so on to tolerate these deviating machines. And I don't know that there's any other sane way to approach this. I think that's simply what you have to do is you have to try to bring the system to a new place and figure out what doesn't work, and then take it from there. And yeah, so as I was saying, like my approach has just been to say, I'm content targeting QEMU as my idealized guest environment for now. Other people are much more interested in bare metal execution than I am, so there are people who work on that. But I have so many goals that are not hardware related or really far from hardware, like building intricate desktop software like web browsers and things like that, which don't require thinking about hardware things. So I'm content with as long as QEMU works, like I can do everything that I want to do right now. And that's sort of where things are. Chris Turkle says, I think building Serenity on Serenity should be in the FAQ. I think you're absolutely right about that, Chris. We need to put that in there. And we should also put how does the system draw pixels on screen? Where is the draw pixel syscall? Because people, over time, we start to discover what are the frequently asked questions. Let's see. So Tim, hello Tim, nice to see you here. Hello, Andreas and friends. I want a Golang style defer mechanism in C++. I went looking in the ACK namespace in Serenity for one, but I didn't see anything. Do you have some defer thing in Serenity? Yes, we do, Tim. We have a thing called a ScopeGuard. It's ACK ScopeGuard, and it also has a little sibling here called the armed ScopeGuard. But ScopeGuard is very simple. Let me show you how to use it. So you simply instantiate it like this, and you give it some kind of lambda that should execute when the ScopeGuard goes out of scope. So you could, for example, put here print hello Tim. And this will then execute when we exit the scope. And then you can do things like this, right, to narrow the scope. And if you prefer, you can obviously write it in this way instead, or whatever syntax is favorable to you. We also have the armed ScopeGuard, which is the same basic concept, but with one additional feature. So let's see, won't be printed, let's say. And the reason it won't be printed is because I will disarm it. So armed ScopeGuard is a ScopeGuard. By default, they do the same thing, but if you call disarm on it, it will no longer execute the lambda on destruction. So check those out. Let's see. Saeed says, hi, does Python work on Serenity? Yes, Linus has ported Python to Serenity. So let's check that out. So if you go in the ports Python 3 directory, it seems like I need to build Python in my toolchain here first. But yes, it has a Python 3.10 release candidate port. And Linus has been keeping it reasonably up to date, I think. And as far as I know, the main thing that does not work yet in Python is sockets. So you can't use pip and you can't do network programming. That's something that should be taken care of course, by somebody who cares about Python. That person is not me, but that's an open thing to take care of. Let's see. Adrian says, how big of a goal for you personally is it to make SerenityOS more compatible with modern hardware? Is it something you think you'll put a lot of time in, or only if the community steps up? Right, so that's kind of what we just talked about. It's not really important to me at this stage, but it becomes more important later as the system gets more mature and I get to the point where now I want to run this on my actual native hardware here, right? Then it needs to actually run on that hardware, and I think I'll maybe take a more active approach to it at that point. But the way things are going right now, I'm really happy just building up the user space and improving the maturity and capabilities of our desktop system. And there are plenty of people working on the various hardware aspects of the system. So it's not like we're not making progress on it. It's just that something that I'm not working much on. Although I have been working a bit on multi-core recently, to be fair, but that's not necessarily support for specific drivers and things like that, but rather support for multi-core architecture in the kernel. Let's see, the ifam5 says maybe .app from macOS would be neat to have. Yeah, that's a possibility, for example. That's something that I've looked into at some points, like framework bundles. It might be interesting. It would require some re-architecting of some parts of the system to support that better, but it is interesting. Let's see what this person's name is here. Cold Coffee? I can still read this. I learned how to read these in the 90s. Hi from Bosnia. I have a question. What is the state of OpenGL support in SerenityOS? There's an open source project for GTA 3, and I was thinking if OpenGL is stable enough. So OpenGL is definitely not stable, but there is ongoing work right now to bring Quake 1 onto our OpenGL implementation. There were patches towards that just this morning or last night that I looked at. So we are making progress on it. About that GTA thing, I just read earlier today that they were being sued about the reverse engineering project that they had about GTA, which obviously is pretty sad. And it sounds to me like that project may be on track to be disappeared. So if anybody wants to hold on to the code for that for whatever reason, it might be a smart idea not to delete what you have cloned. Just saying. So let's see. Nicholas says, hello, awesome project. Thank you. I also think that it's awesome. I'm very, very happy with it, very proud of it, and very, very proud of everybody who works on it. Let's see. David John says, how does ScopeGuard work? RAII, or do you have assembly stubs for it? It's a simple RAII thing. So let's take a look at it. So we use a templated callback here to store whatever you give it. So essentially, because it's always instantiated in functional local scope, we don't need to use a function object or anything like that. We can just use a templated callable thing. And you see here that when we destroy the ScopeGuard, we just invoke this callback. And the armed ScopeGuard works much the same, just that it also has an armed bool that you can then disarm to prevent the destructor from invoking it. Let's see. Nicholas says, could GTK Plus or KDE be ported to SerenityOS? Sure. If somebody was determined to do that, they could totally do that. There is an ongoing port of Qt at the moment. I haven't seen activity in the last couple of days, but it was going pretty well. They had graphical applications up and running, and it's not unthinkable that you would go from a graphical Qt port to running KDE. I'm not personally interested in running either of these things on Serenity. I'm here to build software from scratch and build really tight, vertically integrated software. But that doesn't stop anybody else from taking an interest in these things and seeing them through. So that's like something that people can work on if they like to. And then Chisa says, why not make ScopeGuard it a macro so you can just say defer? So we usually don't use macros to obfuscate what's going on, because I'm not a fan of like trying to change the language by using macros. I feel like that is very sneaky and kind of ugly way of dealing with it. I would much rather, as long as it's reasonable, I would rather express myself directly. And also, I don't like the idea of like not being able to specify my capture. Graham says, is there any hard limitations to running Serenity in the virtual environment, and could it feasibly be run full time? The hard limitations are whatever resources you give to it, but as I was saying, the default configuration right now runs a single CPU. You can boot it with multiple CPUs, but it is fairly unstable, so I don't recommend anybody trying to run that way for any serious work. And I don't know, like that's something, if somebody's interested in that, they should explore that. It's not something that I'm actively exploring, so I couldn't tell you how feasible it is. Yeah. Mustafa says, maybe you should have a weekly segment in office hours where you show some of your favorite changes in the last week. Yes, maybe I should. There have certainly been a bunch of changes recently. I know somebody has been just going crazy on Pixel Paint, for example, hacking on the various features. But that's not a bad idea. This week, as I said when we first started the stream, I've had kind of a weird week because there's been so much publicity and attention around the project recently, and I find it a little bit like overwhelming, I guess, to deal with that. I am getting better at it, but every time that some article or podcast or something comes out, I just kind of lose a whole day, I feel like. From stressing about it before it comes out, and then from kind of tension releasing, and then just falling asleep afterwards. So I don't know. I don't know that the Serenity marketing blitz will continue much longer. Maybe we get to go back to normal now. But yeah, that's definitely something that we could do. Let's see. Adam says, hey Andreas, absolutely amazed by what you've done with Serenity. How do I increase the memory assigned to the QEMU VM when running it? So the easiest way to do that is to edit the, we have the run script here in meta run. If you just bring that thing up, and then I think it's Serenity RAM size. Yeah. So maybe you can actually even override this on the command line. I usually go in here and just hack it to like 4 gig or whatever, or 2 gig. But actually, maybe I can do that on the command line. Serenity RAM size 2G. Let me see. I haven't tried this. Clickety click. Yes, now I have 2 Gs. Also, at large sizes like 2 gigabytes, maybe it doesn't make sense to express them in kilobytes. Feels like an area where we could probably improve readability here. Yeah, so I guess what you do is you just export Serenity RAM size in your environment before you run the runner script. We do support, we have physical address extension support, so you should be able to give like 10 gigs to the machine, even in 32-bit mode. And it should be able to make use of that, although obviously since it's 32-bit, it cannot give any more than 3 gigabytes to any one process, but across many processes can still make use of 10 gigabytes or whatever you toss at it. Let's see. Oopsie doopsie. Let me not fall behind too much. So let's see. Klaus says, Thank you for the answer about hypervisors. I did not know that the guest system is aware of the virtualization. Does this mean that QEMU devices expose interfaces beyond port mapped I/O and memory mapped I/O? I don't know that they do that in particular. I think like the virtualization specific interfaces are still using memory mapped I/O, but we are certainly aware of it. I mean, if you run lspci, for example, and then you can see here that we identified we have a QEMU bridge, PCI bridge right here, and the display controller actually doesn't have a name, but I happen to know that 123411111 is the virtualized graphics card that QEMU has. And then you can actually add more virtual devices. The default settings, we don't add as many as we could, but yes, they announce themselves as virtualization devices. And there has been a bunch of work also on integrating stuff like the SPICE protocol for being able to copy and paste out of Serenity when you're running it in a virtual environment. But that stuff is still a little bit finicky, so I don't tend to use it yet. Let's see. So Alexandros says, I have been programming for a couple of years, but I have been thinking about quitting recently. It has not really worked out for me, unfortunately. How does one know if programming just is not for them and that they should just find something different? So I think the way that you know that is if programming makes you happy, like if you enjoy programming and it's something that you do for fun, then you shouldn't quit. But if you feel like you're doing this as a career and you're not getting where you want to with your career, and you're not enjoying programming outside of your job either, then yeah, look for something different. I mean, you don't have to keep trying the same thing and expecting something to change, because it won't. But if you truly enjoy programming and you do it recreationally for fun, I don't think you should give up. Although you may need to kind of calibrate your expectations, like because for some people it doesn't really work to have something as their job which is also their hobby. I know that's something I've struggled with personally in the past. Like when I worked at Apple, for example, I would spend all my programming energy at work and I never worked on my personal projects, and that's something that actually made me really sad. And it wasn't until I took a different job later on where I didn't care so much about the work, and I was able to do recreational programming in my free time again because I had the energy for it. And that's also how I worked on Serenity the first 2 years, while still having a full-time programming job, because I didn't care so deeply about that job that I didn't have energy for Serenity. But I mean, it's a tricky thing, of course, and there's many factors, and I don't know your whole situation, but I would just say that if you love programming, then don't give up on it. You should never give up on something you love. But maybe you just need to adjust your expectations and adjust what you, and try some different type of it. Laurent says, hey, awesome channel and project. Do you have any long-term plans besides working on Serenity? Will there be a point where you'll feel satisfied enough so you want to invest time in other projects? So I don't have a plan inside of Serenity or outside of Serenity. But when I started this project, I made sure that I know that this is going to take a long time. And I've kind of accepted since the beginning that this is going to take decades to complete, or even get to something that could be called completion, and I'm okay with that. And because of the extreme scope and ambition of this project, I don't really see that I need to leave the project for any reason, because there's always, even if I get totally bored of some part of the system, I can just work on another part of the system. it's still programming, which I deeply love, and it is what I want to do. So I definitely don't have a desire to do anything else short term or long term. That said, you can never really know what happens in the future, so we'll just have to wait and see. But I am, at the moment, I'm perfectly happy with the prospect of doing this for the next 60 years, if that's what we do. Let's see. David John says, any plans to... no plans. I don't have any plans. And whatever the rest of your sentence says, I just don't have a plan. But whatever the thing is, maybe you have a plan for it, and I welcome you to share your plan and to work on it. LOL Player says, hi, where can I get the wallpaper image that you have on your host system? This one right here. I have posted this in the artwork channel on Discord. So if you're not already a member of our Discord, you can go to discord.gg/SerenityOS. And in the artwork channel, if you scroll back a tiny little bit, you should be able to find this image. Or maybe it was in the Andreas YouTube channel, because now I don't remember where I put it. But so I will just put it there again. Let's say I'll put it in the artwork channel again, and make sure that you can get it. Let's see. Nicholas says, thanks for the answer. Yes, this project is goals in terms of its community and its progress so far. Right. Yes, I'm very, very proud of the community and the progress that we're making. I think it's clear to me that everybody is doing their best, putting their best foot forward and like doing the best that they can. And that's something that I really appreciate, because it is an honor to be surrounded by people trying their hardest to do the best possible work. And I mean, this obviously started as kind of a pet project for me, or a hobby project for me, and it still is that. But the fact that so many people fell in love with it and wanted to put their own max effort programming into it is really quite something. So I do feel very, very special about that. Chapek says, hi, speaking of building software from scratch, are you going to build your own C++ compiler for Serenity? I don't have a plan for the future, but if somebody has a plan to do that, then they're welcome to share that plan and indulge everybody. Githao says, does Serenity have a service manager like systemd? Right. So that's actually one of the first things we talked about today, the system server, which is the first user space program that launches on Serenity. And system server is configured via the etc system server ini file. And it runs these services, but it's not as sophisticated in terms of dependency graphs and sequencing as systemd. And kind of what you see here is what you get. And it works for the desktop as it is today, although it has some flaws. For example, there is no real user separation here. Like if you wanted to have a second desktop user account, it's not clear how that would interact with system server as it's currently configured. So there's a big area there to be explored. But yes, this is the system server that is our init equivalent. Ivan says, can you start SerenityOS in console mode? Yes, you can. You can run it in console mode if you like. It has a frame buffer console in the kernel. I normally never use it because I want to do graphical interface things, work in that environment, but it does have a text console. It is very useful when you try to bring up the system on bare metal hardware, for example. And there's some way to tell the kernel to boot in text-only mode, but I don't remember exactly what it is. But if you ask somebody on Discord, they will have the latest information about that. So M. Costa says, would it make more sense to implement a compatible git/libgit in Serenity or invent a new version control system? I think if you want to support version control, I think implementing a git compatible would be significantly more useful than inventing something new. Much like we're not trying to replace the web, we're just implementing HTML and JavaScript and CSS, right? Git works really well. We make really good use of it. And I don't see why we should implement something, a new system, just because we can. That's not really something that we do too much of in Serenity. We're very happy using existing formats and protocols, and then just trying to build our own interpretations of them, or our own implementations of them. It seems to me that that's the more productive approach. If you try to replace everything with something you come up with yourself, I'm sure that some people would find that fun, but I don't think we would get very far if we did that. Mahmoud says, how to pass CMake debug flags like -d text editor debug. So you would pass those when you run CMake. So for example, d text editor debug, and then, you know, whatever your CMake arguments are. Oh, wait. Oh, is that not how you do that? Oh, I have to equal something on. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, you just pass it to CMake, but you have to assign something to it. So =1, I guess, works. Cold Coffee says, yesterday I tried making a keyboard map for BA. I don't know what that is, but it appears that characters such as these right here get converted to a question mark once loaded. Are the characters limited by a range? No, the characters should be, any UTF-8 character should be possible, but I haven't actually looked at this. I mean, I use a US English key map myself, so I never make use of the keyboard or character mapping system in Serenity. But at least in theory, the input to the character mapping code should be a JSON file that supports arbitrary Unicode code points, I would think, but I don't actually know for sure about that. We would have to look closer at it. You should ask somebody who actually knows about this, somebody who doesn't just use US English like me. If you go on Discord and you ask, you can ask about that. I'm sure somebody knows about it. So Mehdi says, Linux confuses me by giving me too many choices in terms of desktop environments. I hope in the future Serenity will not confuse people like me. Well, Serenity does not aim to have multiple desktop environments. There's a single desktop environment, and that's big part of the design of the system, is to build a single unified cohesive thing rather than you know, the Linux approach of 5,000 random packages from around the web that have to fit together. So at least the system in the base configuration of Serenity will not have multiple desktops ever, because that would just I think that would just be very messy and ugly. So Alex says, have you found any particularly tricky deadlocks while working on SMP? Not really, actually. Like, they've all been pretty standard. Most of the harder ones have been where you take locks in different order, depending on some sequence of things happening, and then sort of having to figure out, oh shoot, so because of the way that locks are taken, this thing cannot be allowed to happen before that thing, so we have to reorganize the code so that it doesn't happen in that way. And also just trying to scope locking much tighter so that you try to do as much as you can without holding locks. But there haven't been any particularly tricky ones. All of the issues that we've looked at so far have been like pretty standard, I guess, standard problems. But maybe I'm just saying that because I haven't found the particularly tricky ones yet. And once I do, I will be able to tell you what they were. So we'll see. Let's see. Yuval says, how do you find a balance between adding features and fixing bugs / refactoring code? How do you find a balance? I guess, I don't know. Like, to me, it's kind of conscience driven, I think. I have some internal meter of the quality of the system, or the stability and quality and general polish. And sometimes I start to feel that, like we're starting to lag behind on quality and polish, and like the system is crashing here and there. And I realize that I've memorized things that I shouldn't do because it will crash. And once I realize that I've memorized, 2 or 3 things that I shouldn't click on because they crash, then I start to get irritated and I stop thinking about features and start thinking about fixing those type of things. And that's just one random example of something, but I think it's a continuous reflection process where you always have to evaluate sort of where things are, and it's something that you just have to be honest about. Like, is the system getting better, or is it getting worse in terms of quality, polish, stability, performance, all of these things? Like, obviously I'm the one person working full time on this, so I do take it upon myself to continuously evaluate this. But I do see other people putting time into this type of approach as well sometimes, and I really appreciate that. But it's not something that I would ever ask anybody else to do actively. I tend to only ask people to be reactive to regressions that they themselves cause, so that if you break something or if you make something a bit worse, then I would ask you to make it better. But I'm never going to ask somebody to work on something that they don't want to. Let's see. Mustafa asks, how much Serenity merch do you have? I have a little bit of this and that, but not terribly much. I wouldn't feel good selling merch that I haven't tried out myself. So I have ordered like one of everything. And that's basically what I have. And I have these stickers here, for example. And of course the Yak Overflow shirt, and an assortment of coffee cups. Anyways, let's see. So Ecoptic says he gets very frustrated when he doesn't know how to do something. Do I have any experience writing compilers? No, I don't really have any experience writing compilers. Other than the bytecode compiler I started writing for the JavaScript engine. That's it. So I don't know much about that. Dragoon says, does your operating system have the overcommit problem caused by fork? Or did you go for more like just spawning process directly, kind of like Windows/Posix spawn? So we currently do not overcommit. So if you fork, then the fork will fail if we cannot accommodate it. And that doesn't mean that it will necessarily survive very long after you successfully fork, but fork itself is failable if there's not enough memory. And that's an area where there's still exploration to do in terms of like, how do we want this to work? Do we want to add some sort of additional layer of virtual memory, like compressed pages or things like that? Or if you have an SSD, do you want to have a swap reservation? I don't know. But currently we just fail your fork if we can't accommodate the memory requirement. Mustafa says, how do you go about getting something to build on bare metal? Compile, flash a drive, plug it in, and reboot? Yes, that's basically what you do. The way I've tested it myself has been by having a second partition. So I just compile on the main partition and then install it on the second partition and then reboot into the second partition. There are definitely smoother workflows that you can use. I know some people who do this have set up like a second machine that has like an emulated IDE device or something like that that they can image from their main machine, and then they use a serial cable to get the console and stuff like that. But because it's not something I do frequently, I haven't set up a convenient environment for it. Let's see. Mr. Unknown says, what do you think is the future of SerenityOS? I don't know. I don't know. We'll have to see. Adam Strell says, how did you think about / plan the project in the beginning? I did not plan the project. When I looked at the first commit, you did not begin with booting a system. That's right. I began by building some random little parts. So I built an ELF executable parser, an ext2 file system browser, and a GUI framework, because those were some things I wanted to tinker with. And then when I had those, I realized at some point that if I just put a kernel underneath all this, then it will become a graphical operating system. So that's sort of, it just happened that way. I'm not really, I'm not sure that trying to plan your fun is useful. So I just try to have fun. But I don't want to stop anybody else from planning their stuff, but I don't make plans. Simon says, where in the codebase is the most beautiful solution located? Or at least the one you are most fond of? I don't know. That's a fair question. I guess I would say it's not really that type of code base where we strive for the most beautiful solution to things. It's more of like a pragmatic code base where we try to like actually achieve things rather than make beautiful code. I guess I like to imagine that we, instead of having like isolated pieces of beautiful solutions, we instead have a quite high baseline of beauty in the code, with deviations both up and down in quality. But something that I am quite fond of, I guess, I like the garbage collector in the JavaScript engine. I think it's a very, very straightforward and simple implementation of a conservative GC that just integrates seamlessly with the C++ stack. I think it turned out pretty good. And obviously it can be a lot more sophisticated, but for what it is at this stage of maturity, it is a nice little garbage collector. The IFAM says, on bare metal, you can also network boot through TFTP. Ah, that's true, yes. that's something that some people have been doing, is setting up netboot, which allows you to, if your bare metal machine supports it, it can actually fetch the boot image over the TFTP protocol, and then you're booting directly from that environment rather than having to have anything on disk. That's probably the simplest way. If you have hardware that supports netboot and TFTP, that's probably the smoothest way to do continuous testing, I would imagine. But I'm not experienced enough to be sure. M. Costa says, how often do you test Serenity on bare metal? What do you do with it? So I test that maybe like once a year, just to give you an idea of how much I care about it. And what I do with it, last time I tested it, I booted up and I played Quake. That's what I did with it. Mustafa says, can confirm the Serenity codebase is incredibly easy to just read casually and for the most part understand everything. That is fantastic. I think that so far that has been the general sentiment from everybody who's spent more than an insignificant amount of time interacting with the code base. Everybody seems to find it very readable and understandable, and obviously some concepts take longer to understand, but if you are an experienced programmer, then it seems that you should be feeling pretty much right at home. And that's not to say that I imagine it to be perfect. Like, there's definitely room for improvement, and we have kind of a continuous improvement culture, or as Mustafa refers to it, security by instability, where we are continuously improving the code base as we think of, oh, here's something that could actually be encapsulated in a pattern that keeps repeating, right? So you have something that keeps repeating, so we try to come up with a pattern that can be repeated throughout the code base to take away the cognitive burden of whatever it is that we've identified. And like the armed ScopeGuard, for example, is such a thing. So we talked about the ScopeGuard, which is a defer mechanism, and then the armed ScopeGuard, because sometimes you want a way to say, oh, I didn't actually want to run that defer thing anymore, and we needed a way to prevent that from happening, so we added this guy. And then after you add something like this, you think of a better way to do something, because actually, let me expand on that a little bit. So in these ScopeGuard scenarios here, right? So before we had the ARM ScopeGuard, if you changed your mind and you didn't want to execute this stuff anymore, what you had to do was like, don't do hello Tim, and then you had to check that here. So like, if don't do hello Tim, return, and then maybe you changed your mind and you had to set this flag. And obviously this was very like cumbersome and kind of messy, and you identify something like this, you come up with a better encapsulation, and then we try to take the time to make use of that pattern everywhere once we identify a better way to do something. Sometimes that takes time though, and just because we think of a better pattern doesn't mean that we know everywhere that it could be applied, so that's usually an incremental process. And actually, I was thinking about that just yesterday, about if we should have some sort of document that describes sort of these patterns that we come up with, that we decide, oh, this is a good pattern, we should proliferate it or whatever, so that it could turn into kind of a resource for people who want to participate in this continuous refactoring, that like it would describe, oh, here's a pattern that we used to do, and here's a better way of doing it. And then somebody could take that document and go and apply those transformations to the code base. I'm not exactly sure how that would work or look, but maybe that's something that could be interesting. As it is now, there are some good patterns that need to be proliferated. Let's see. Ty the guy says, "Hi Andreas, I've been a programmer for 2 years now, but I feel like my skill level has plateaued over the past year. Any tips for improving?" Also have a great weekend. Well, thank you. You have a great weekend too. For improving, I think if you feel like your skill level has plateaued, you need to do harder things. And it's very easy to get comfortable and do things that you know how to do. But just like you're not going to get stronger if you go to the gym and you bench 60 kilos once a week, right? Like you have to add weight each session or periodize your training and whatnot. In that same way, if you want to get better at programming, you have to take on more challenging projects and more challenging things. And my personal favorite recommendation is to join open source projects. You can join, there's thousands and thousands of projects where you can join and work on something that interests you together with people who know a lot of things that you don't know. And in part, it helps just to be in those new environments where you're not an expert on anything and you're forced to learn the new code base and take in all the new patterns and whatnot. And then you get exposure to the people that helps you as well. But that's usually what I recommend. If you're not, for some reason, you don't want to participate with others, you can always do more difficult projects yourself. But essentially, you have to, like, improving your skill is an active thing. Like, you're not going to passively improve if you don't do anything. So many people who join the SerenityOS project find themselves improving, but I think that's in large part because they're also very interested in what they're doing here. And if you're interested in working on Serenity, then I welcome you to do that. I think you should find the thing that you're really interested in and try to work on that. And pick something a little bit challenging. Graham says, "What would be your preferred distribution media for Serenity, CD or floppy?" Definitely CD or DVD, or if I have to choose one of those things. I once installed Windows 95 from, I want to say 26 floppies or something like that, and it was tedious. And I remember that one of them didn't work, so I had to go and find another one and make a copy of it, and that was really tedious. I have too much experience with floppy disks failing to look back on them in any kind of fond way. So yeah, definitely some kind of optical medium. So be it. Build Andy says, "Similar to what we're seeing with East Const right now, eh?" Well, one problem that we're having with the East Const in Serenity is that we don't have a way to enforce it with tooling. So Clang format manages all of our formatting stuff, except it can't do East Const or West Const. And there's an open discussion about that on the Clang format bug tracker. And they keep arguing and arguing. And it seemed a bit like they were finally making some progress. But I haven't checked up on it super recently. Let's see when they were last commenting on here. Where are the comments? Yeah, so there's a little bit of activity going on here in August. Okay, well, need to dig into that a bit, but it is unfortunate because basically we don't have a way to automatically enforce it, and that means that people make mistakes, and then other people show up and they poo-poo those mistakes, and it's all kind of a waste of time. Because the whole reason that we like using Clang format is so that we don't have to have these pointless discussions about style. Like, we have a bot that will tell you on GitHub that, oh, your thing is not the right coding style, and that's where it should be. But with these const placement thing, we have kind of regressed into a state where now people are poo-pooing each other about it, and that's unfortunate. So I'm like, at the moment, basically the policy from my perspective is that project style is east const, try to write east const, but if somebody messes up, like, let's not like make a big deal about it. We'll just move forward, and eventually tooling should become available to automate the whole thing, and the problem goes away. Mustafa says, I particularly enjoy fixing old code. You might have noticed me going and adding libconfig everywhere. Yes, I did notice that. Thank you very much, Mustafa. And I do think that there tend to be a large group of people who enjoy fixing these things up. I love doing that. I've done so much of that in WebKit, for example. Like, we would figure out some nice new pattern, and then I would spend 2 weeks applying it everywhere in the code base. And I had a not my direct manager, but the department director for the entire Internet Services and Technologies department at Apple is also very much into this type of stuff. So we would sometimes join forces and apply these type of things throughout the code base. It was a good time. And yeah, I think maybe we can formalize that a little bit in Serenity, and it could even be like a great way to create these good first issue type things, but it's not really a good first issue. It's more like a good first refactoring. I don't know. I need to think a little bit more about that, and maybe try to come up with a prototype for something, but yeah. Morton says, hi there. If people ask you to open source a project and you would love to do that, but you don't have time to maintain/review pull requests, does it make any sense to actually open source it then? Well, yeah, of course. I mean, you can open source something without committing to taking pull requests. That's perfectly fine. Like, just because you put something on GitHub, for example, does not mean that you have consented to people like taking up your time and like forcing you to merge their things. Like, you can put something up and you say like, this is open source, but I don't take pull requests. Like, if that's what you want, then you can do that. I think it's a really strange thing to me when people, some people get really, really upset about like, oh, I put this thing on GitHub and then I got all these annoying people filing bug reports about it, or all these annoying students sending me pull requests. And I think that is really, really silly, because if you put something on GitHub, that's not a commitment to anything. Like, you have to set your boundaries yourself, because if you don't set your boundaries, then other people will just set them for you. So I think absolutely you can just make it open source and make it clear that you're not going to act on pull requests. Let's see. M. Costa says, is there any utility class or library that you are missing in Serenity? Probably, but then usually when something like that comes up, then we just add it. More generally, though, maybe one thing that I do feel is missing sometimes is a more sophisticated 2D graphics canvas with an anti-aliasing backend. That's something where we do have anti-aliasing, for example, in the TrueType font rendering engine. But if you wanted to like just make a bitmap and draw some anti-alias polygon in there, it's not straightforward to do that. And also, if you wanted to do that and apply in a fine transformation or something like that, then there's also no nice API for that, because the graphics painter API, while it has served us well so far, it is lacking some fundamental things that prevent building bigger and awesomer things with it, like better SVG, for example. So that's probably an area where eventually I'm going to work on. But there's so many things that I want to work on that it's just one of hundreds. It's just the first thing that came to mind. It's not any more urgent than anything else. Let's see. Graham has also installed Win95 through floppy. It was a nightmare indeed. Indeed. Jack Benson says, in your experience, how much performance gain do you get from converting obj update into objects update obj? I don't know exactly what that means. But to generalize, regardless, in my experience, I don't generally look at like, oh, let's take this pattern and transform it into this other pattern for performance. 100% of performance work that I do is driven by, here's a profile. It's of this thing that's running slowly. Let's try to change things to make it go faster. What can we change? Some ideas, and then, experiment with, different data structures, different algorithms, different whatever patterns. I'm not a fan of like, of this sort of best practices type development where you try to generalize a transformation and then you do it everywhere thinking that you're improving performance. I think performance should be approached from a completely analytical and empirical angle, where you just profile things and identify hotspots and then attack them with investigation and optimization transformations. Kyle Landmon says, does C++ have a concept of code mod where you can write code that will transform other code? Could be useful for when there is a new pattern. C++ does not have something like that, but I know that people have written Clang plugins, or not Clang plugins, like there's like Clang has a library that allows you to write these transformation utilities, basically. I know that the Chrome people, when Chrome originally forked WebKit, they wanted to rewrite the entire project in Google's own internal coding style. So I think they wrote a Clang thing, something that used Clang in order to change all the variable names and function names and everything so that they would conform to Google style. And I don't know how that works though. I never done it myself, but yeah, it might be useful. It really depends on if the pattern is sufficiently specific that you can describe it in terms of an AST transformation, or in terms of something that a computer program can identify. Some patterns are kind of loose and you need a human to actually go and look for matches. But yeah, I agree that it could be useful if you can do that. So Mustafa says that he agrees. My first exposure to the codebase was last week after I saw the video, and I wanted to see if I could use the new config client somewhere. Definitely help give me something to do to navigate. Yeah, right. And that's the whole value of these good first project type issues, where you know, you give people a reason to modify the code in some small way, and that gives them that nudge to go on the journey where they get to know the code base. So yeah, this we should explore this. Cold Coffee says, once SerenityOS is stable, I think people will be able to use it as a Windows alternative because of how similar it is. Well, yes and no. I don't think Serenity would ever be useful as a replacement to somebody coming from modern day Windows, because modern day Windows is quite different from what Serenity is, right? If you had unfrozen somebody who was cryogenically frozen in 2001 and you gave them Serenity, maybe they would think, oh, wow, this is just like Windows. But a bunch of things have happened since then, so I'm not too sure about that particular motivation for somebody to use it. And really, like, acquiring new users is not something that is a goal of this project. Really, what we want to acquire is new developers, if anything. Like, that's the people that I want to make this attractive to. Because this is the whole goal of the Serenity project is to build a system for ourselves. And I'm just here building something that I want to use. And for other people, obviously everybody has their own motivations, but I want everybody to just build something because they want to, not because we're trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator or trying to get as many users as possible, something like that. There are so many projects already that do that, and I think there's room here for a project that doesn't try to do that, that just tries to make something really nice that we like. And yeah, as Mustafa says here, like, too many good things have gone awry trying to serve the needs of everybody. That's so true. Like, if you try to please everybody, then you will simply never please anybody. Let's see. Arseny says, hi, is there a word processing application? Well, not really. We have the text editor. That's what we have in terms of word processing. We do not have, we don't have a rich text editor, if that's what you mean. We do have some Markdown integration in our text editor. So apparently that's crashing right now. But let's set this to Markdown preview. Foobar. Hello. Oh, those were the same size. This is the closest thing to word processing that we have. It's an area that could be interesting. If we wanted to do word processing, I would prefer to see it on top of web technologies, probably, because I feel like that would synergize pretty well with what we're already trying to do with the system. But you know, as with everything, like, it needs to be explored. Let's see. Cold Coffee says, several months ago, I wanted to try such a project with Linux, but seeing now that SerenityOS is recreating the past in a good way, I am grateful to be part of this community. Well, I am glad you feel that way. The one thing I would say about that is that while we are recreating the past in one sense, it is not strictly just a recreation, right? Like, we are identifying things that were great in the past, things that were beautiful, and then we're bringing them into the modern age with modern tools. And as they mature, then we will iterate on them and improve upon them using everything that we've learned in the 20 years since these were sort of the popular computing paradigms. Let's see. The Cloner X says, what is your opinion on asynchronous syscalls? I don't have a strong opinion about that. It seems like something that would vastly complicate our infrastructure at the moment. And there are so many things that we need to solve before we dig into stuff like that. Like you can probably improve our IO performance 10x or 20x by just doing less stupid crap. You don't need fancy asynchronous syscalls in order to improve hugely. German WTB says, any thoughts on how hard it would be to have windows outside Window Manager, like classic window in window, and putting that code into a UEFI pre-boot binary? What does that mean? Window in window, I'm putting that code into UEFI. You mean like having a little tiny little window, self-contained Windows system within a single program? I mean, we don't have, the infrastructure is not set up to support that at the moment, but when I originally wrote the prototype that became the Serenity GUI library, I had, basic like moving a window around inside of a frame buffer. That doesn't take more than, an hour or two to get that working with something like SDL. And that's something that anybody should be able to do in a weekend if they're comfortable with their language. But I don't know exactly what it is that you want to build, so it's hard to comment more specifically. Nico says, is LibreSSL/OpenSSL ported to Serenity? How about SQLite? I believe we have OpenSSL and SQLite both. Let's see, we have OpenSSL, yes, and we have SQLite, yes. Of course, these are just ports. We don't normally use ports for, nothing in the system depends on ports. The ports are just for fun, for people who want to have ports. So if you want to port your password manager for Serenity, you can certainly install those 2 ports and port your password manager and set those 2 ports as dependencies. We also have our own libTLS, and libSQL is in heavy development, building up a SQLite-like database system. Paul says, hi, good afternoon from Germany. Good afternoon, Paul. Paul. Yes. Let's see. Nico says, I'm also interested about things like dev-urandom, etc. Yeah, we have dev-urandom. Let's cat dev-urandom. Look at all that crap. It even made the terminal crash. Made the terminal crash in unimplemented OSC sequence. Yeah, we need to fuzz the terminal a little bit, I think. Let's see, Radiant Mango says, do we still need to build a Clang toolchain like we do with GCC? As I understand, it supports multiple architecture backends. I don't know. I haven't tested the scripts for building the Clang toolchain. I ran them once and they just kind of worked, but I don't know how you would use your existing Clang compiler. Maybe you can. That's something that maybe Daniel or somebody could answer if you ask on Discord. There's a Clang toolchain dedicated channel called Clang toolchain on the SerenityOS Discord if you have questions about that. Let's see. German WTB says the idea for that window in window would be writing a boot manager thingy while using the Serenity GUI library. And that would have to work with a single process, so app and compositor in one. Right. Yeah, so there's no straightforward way to do that right now. It reminds me a bit of Qt. They had something like this. I forget what it was called, but it was a way to run in a very simplified mode where Qt would provide a frame buffer and window manager and everything all in one. You could probably do it, but it would be a whole lot of code to make it work nicely with the GUI library as it is right now. But you could do it. I don't know that it would be worth it for if you don't have a specific use case in mind. Like, yeah, you say you want to write a boot manager thingy, but Is it really worth making the library that much more generic and bloated just so that you can have a GUI looking boot manager for a couple of seconds when you boot? I don't know. But if there's a more compelling use case, then that might be interesting. And I have to actually go after the next question here. So let's see. Nico says, did you actually make pledge for Serenity? I remember that you started something like that at least. Yes, we do have pledge. We are here in id.cpp, which is the ID program that tells you your user ID. And as you can see, it pledges. And it is very, very similar to the one in OpenBSD. But we have some of our own extensions. And there are some things that they support that we don't support, and a bunch of things that we support that they don't support. So they're not word for word compatible with the OpenBSD pledges. You can go to man.serenityos.org, and in section 2, you can find the pledge man page and read about the available settings and how it works. Character X says, hey, why don't you use C? Because C++ is a objectively more powerful and more useful language, and it would take too long to build all these things in C. That Linux guy says, what does pledge do? Pledge reduces the amount of things that you can do in a program. So you tell pledge tells the kernel, hello kernel, I promise that I will only do this thing, and this thing. And then from then on, the kernel will remember that. And if that program ever tries to do anything else than what it said, then the kernel will simply crash that program. And it is a powerful security mechanism that allows programs to reduce their functionality to the point where they can only do the bare minimum that they need. And so if somebody exploits a bug in that program, they have a reduced amount of access to the system for that exploit to cause problems. So, right, so now I am out of time and I have to get going. So I just want to say thank you everybody for coming to office hours. I really appreciate all the questions, technical and non-technical. And I will definitely be expanding the FAQ a little bit. Yeah, thanks so much everybody for coming. I really hope that that people enjoy these office hours and that you get value out of them. If you have feedback on the office hours concept, do let me know. You can comment. This, of course, becomes available as a recording on YouTube, so you can leave a comment about that, or you can come to Discord and talk about it. Because, you know, we've been doing this for a while now, and I would be happy to hear what people think about it. So thanks again for coming, and have a great weekend, everybody. I will see you soon.